Hi, I'm Hannu Larsson, and this is part one of the 4 lectures regarding qualitative interviews. In this lecture, I will be talking about what a qualitative interview is. And from the get-go, I will say that, of course, as with other lectures, this is just a brief introduction to qualitative interviews. I will be talking about some core concepts and giving some hands-on advice, but all these parts, of course, require more reading to the specific aspects of it. Let's get going. So, what is an interview, or specifically, so when is it suitable to use qualitative interviews? They are used to obtain detailed information or in-depth information about a certain topic. You can ask questions that are complex or open-ended, or whose order and logic might not be, should we say, standardized. They can be different for different people. So we already come into this flexibility aspect. We'll also be looking into that with regards to how to ask questions later on. You have the opportunity to explore emotions, experiences, or feelings of the people involved in a certain case, for instance. And this can't easily be observed or described through like predefined survey responses or written questions, but something that you need to probe into by having a conversation, by having an interview. And this also gives you the opportunity to investigate what could be seen as sensitive issues or privileged information, things that people might be reluctant to share information on otherwise. For instance, sharing official documents or informal communications in an organization, or other kinds of data that might be viewed, at least from their standpoint, as sensitive. Uh, and building a report with the person you're interviewing or the persons you're interviewing would, of course, be crucial to this, to getting access to this kind of information that would require their trust. And there are, of course, different kinds of interviews. We have, to put it simple, structured interviews, unstructured or semi-structured, as well as group interviews. This is the classification that Myers and Newman have defined. In these lectures, I will be talking mainly about the unstructured or semi-structured interview, rather. One way to visualize this is here at the top, where we have the structured interview, with have these fixed questions, where the control lies very much with the interviewer. You have an idea that's predetermined regarding what you wish to investigate with this interview. You have a plan on questions to ask, and it's probably important in which order these questions are being asked as well. On the other hand, if we have the semi-structured interviews, or the less structured, unstructured interviews, the control lies more and more with the interviewee or the informant, depending on how unstructured this interview is. And of course, this then means that the researcher has less control over the interview situation. And this, should we say, outcome of the interview depends to a large extent on the flow of this conversation, how it actually works out, because you lack control of the order of questions and so on. And you might even forget to ask certain questions, or questions might be derailed somewhat, depending on how much control the interviewee or informant gets. And another way of looking at this is, of course, this relationship of having one-to-many or one-to-one interviews. We can have focus groups where we quite often sit in a room together with choose a handful of people, can be more, can be less, where they, to a large extent, can have a discussion amongst themselves. This might come back to the previous issue of them potentially derailing what you had set out to do, or having them having more control over the interview situation itself. More common is the one-to-one interview, where you do either face-to-face or telephone interviews, both of which, of course, have the pros and cons. But we won't get stuck too much in talking about the technology this lecture. To wrap up this intro part, I'm going to just mention this model, which we'll be getting back to in quite a few of the other sub-lectures here. And this is the Myers and Newman guidelines for doing qualitative interviews. And they have these 6 parts where we as researchers have to consider and make certain choices with regards to keeping the interview situation both ethical and working in a way that we wish it to be. Uh, and the qualitative interview, in this sense, is very much, I would say, directed towards this semi-structured, unstructured way of doing it. His parts then are situating the researcher in this context. Who is the researcher and what role does the researcher play in this relationship to the interviewee, or the subject as it's called here. The struggle to minimize social dissonance between the interviewer and the subject. We have number 3, representing various voices, which we're talking about when discussing who to talk to or sampling or selecting informants. Number 4 aspect, everyone is an interpreter. The relationship between interviewer and interviewee is complex because both of these parties will interpret each other based perhaps on different backgrounds and different perspectives and different pre-knowledge of the situation. So we'll also be digging in a bit to that. This is just using mirroring questions in a question and answers to mirror the respondent and this aspect of flexibility. How do we ensure that we have a suitable level of flexibility in this relationship so that we can actually fit the task that we want to achieve with this specific interview? And that is, of course, very much context dependent and dependent on this specific interview topic or interview situation. And I almost forgot the 7th part here, the confidentiality and disclosures, which we also will be talking a bit about in the last of these 4 lectures. So, that was a brief introduction, and let's get on with listening to the other parts. Thanks.